Martha and Bill Carter's house in a quiet suburban neighborhood of Houston, Texas appeared ordinary from the outside, just like any other home. However, Martha had no idea that her daily life was about to fall apart. Martha works as a nurse at the local general hospital. After her long shifts, she always felt warmed by the smile of her 7-year-old daughter Amy when she returned home. Martha's brown hair fell to her shoulders, and beneath her eyes were faint traces of fatigue from her constantly busy work. Nevertheless, she always maintained the best smile she could for her family. "Mom, look. I drew this picture at school today." Amy proudly held up a crayon drawing of her family as soon as her mother arrived home. "That's lovely, Amy." Martha took her daughter's artwork and carefully placed it on the wall next to other drawings. The picture showed 3 people, a father, a mother, and Amy herself in the middle. Martha felt a tightness in her chest. Bill had been gone from home for a month. Bill worked at an insurance company and had met Martha in college, winning her heart with his gentle nature and sincerity. Their marriage had seemed to be going well. After Amy was born, both Martha and Bill devoted themselves to balancing work and family, and they were known in the neighborhood as an ideal family. However, a month ago, news arrived that Bill's mother Carol had fallen ill. Carol had lost her husband several years earlier and lived alone in a house near Austin, Texas. That day, Bill told Martha with a serious expression, "My mother is sick and needs care. I'm going to stay at her house for a while." Martha was surprised but immediately showed understanding. "I see, that must be difficult. Let's go as a family and help out." Bill immediately refused that suggestion. "That won't work. Mother is vulnerable to stress from outsiders. Especially now, visits are difficult." The doctor said to maintain a quiet environment. His tone was stronger than usual, and he even seemed a bit flustered. "But Amy and I are family too, aren't we?" Martha said, and Bill's expression softened slightly. "Of course you are. But right now I want to prioritize my mother. It's only planned for a short time, so you understand, right?" For the past month, Bill had started coming home only once a week on weekends. Lately, even those visits had become sporadic. Communication from Bill decreased day by day, with only brief messages saying he was busy or can't leave mother's bedside. Martha looked at her smartphone while preparing dinner in the kitchen. There was still no reply to the message she had sent last night. Amy, having returned from school, was watching TV on the sofa. "When is Daddy coming home?" At Amy's question, Martha tried to put on a smile. "As soon as Grandma gets better. Daddy is busy taking care of Grandma now." Amy made a dissatisfied face. "But I want to see Daddy. I want to see Grandma too." Martha gently stroked her daughter's hair and said, "I know." She paused thoughtfully. It was painful to see her daughter missing her father. Martha herself had begun to feel anxious about the distance growing between her and her husband. The next day, during her shift at the hospital, Martha confided in her colleague Karen. Karen had been a good friend for 20 years and was always understanding of Martha's situation. "Something seems off," Karen's words surprised Martha. "If caregiving was the only reason, why would he keep you and Amy away? And there should be options to hire professional caregivers." Hearing those words,
"Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Reddit Stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious."
Martha felt the doubt growing in her heart. That night, when Amy asked about her father again, Martha made a decision. "Hey, Amy. How about we go visit Daddy and Grandma?" As a surprise. Amy's face lit up. "Really? When are we going?" "This weekend. Don't tell Daddy." "It's a surprise," Martha smiled, but her heart was a mix of anxiety and determination. During the days until the weekend, Martha prepared gifts for Bill, a watch he had been wanting, and get-well presents for Carol, a set of her favorite tea and scones. Outwardly, everything was meant to celebrate a family reunion. But deep down, suspicions about Bill were growing. Why was he keeping them away? Why had Bill's attitude changed recently? And most of all, why was Bill trying to separate his wife and daughter from Carol? On Saturday morning, Martha and Amy got into the car and set off on the 3-hour journey to Austin. Amy was singing excitedly in the back seat. Martha watched her daughter's innocent joy in the rearview mirror. The road to Austin stretched like a green carpet across the vast Texas plains. As Martha gripped the steering wheel, she was immersed in memories of the past. She had first met Bill's mother Carol a year before they got married. "Daddy always said Grandma's apple pie was the best in the world, didn't he?" Amy's voice echoed from the back seat. Martha smiled. Yes, it really was something special. In fact, Carol Carter had been warm toward Martha from the beginning. During the early years of their marriage, she invited them over for every holiday, and when Amy was born, she stayed for 2 weeks to help out. The news that Carol had suddenly fallen ill had been a shock to Martha too. "Will Grandma get better?" Amy asked anxiously. "I'm sure she will," Martha answered brightly, but in reality, she hadn't been told much about her mother-in-law's symptoms. Bill had only said, "There's a problem with her heart," without any further explanation. As they entered the outskirts of Austin, the scenery gradually changed. Martha followed the navigation system along winding roads leading to a lush residential area. Maplewood Street, where Carol's house was located, was a quiet place lined with old maple trees. "We'll be there in about 15 minutes, Martha told Amy, who was absorbed in the scenery outside the window. "Huh?" Martha slowed the car as she looked down the street. It had been over a year since her last visit, but several things were different from her memory. Carol's house had always been in a state of neglect when it came to yard work. The gardening that had been Bill's father's responsibility before his death had been abandoned afterward. But now, the garden she saw was beautifully maintained. The rose bushes were neatly trimmed, the lawn was a vibrant green, and new flowers had been planted along the approach to the front door. "Do you think Daddy is taking care of the garden?" Amy asked. "Maybe," Martha answered, but Bill had never shown interest in gardening. He always said he wasn't good at outdoor work. What also caught her attention was a small red bicycle placed in the corner of the yard. It was about the same size as Amy's and clearly meant for a child. "Mom, whose bicycle is that?" Amy seemed to have noticed it too. "I don't know. Perhaps it belongs to a neighbor's child," Martha tried to hide her unease. After parking the car a little distance from Carol's house, Martha took a mirror from her handbag and checked her appearance. She had worn a new dress for today. It was blue, Bill's favorite color, with a slightly off-shoulder design. She had even had her hair done at the salon. Everything was to please her husband. "Well, shall we go?" Martha said cheerfully, but anxiety was spreading in her chest. Karen's words crossed her mind. Something seems off. As the two got out of the car and started walking, a middle-aged woman approached from the other side of the road, walking a dog. Martha recognized her face. It was Helen Wilson, Carol's longtime friend. "Why, if it isn't Martha. It's been a while." Helen stopped in the middle of the road, holding her dog's leash short. "Amy has grown so much." "Hello, Helen," Martha returned the greeting. "I'm glad to see you're doing well." "It's wonderful that Bill's mother has recovered," Helen said with a smile. "I met her at the supermarket last week, and she looked very energetic. It's amazing to be so active at her age." Martha was momentarily speechless. Carol was well enough to go shopping at the supermarket. According to Bill, she could barely get out of bed. I heard she was quite ill. Oh? Is that so? Helen tilted her head. But last week, she was buying a cart full of groceries. And those children were so cute too. Children? Martha's voice rose involuntarily. Yes, the children Bill brought with him. Especially the little boy, he's so lively. It was heartwarming to see him cuddling up to his grandmother. Martha was confused and felt dizzy. Bill was here with other children. There weren't supposed to be any children other than Amy. Mommy? Amy looked up at Martha with a puzzled expression. Martha came to her senses and pretended to be calm. Thank you, Helen. Let's talk again sometime. She quickly took Amy's hand and started walking toward Carol's house. Mom, is Grandma well? Amy asked. It seems so, Martha answered while considering various possibilities in her mind. Had Bill been lying? Why? And who were these children Helen mentioned? A few dozen meters from Carol's house, Martha stopped. She took out her smartphone and sent a short message to Karen, "We've arrived. Something strange is going on. I'll contact you later." Karen's reply came immediately, "Let me know what happens, no matter what." Martha took a deep breath. It's going to be okay, she told herself. There must be some misunderstanding. Amy squeezed her mother's hand tightly. We'll see Daddy. Her eyes were shining with anticipation. Martha tried to smile, but anxiety was swirling in her chest. The two walked along the small cobblestone path and came within a few steps of Carol's house door. Standing in front of the white door, Martha raised her hand to knock. But then she noticed that the door was slightly ajar. Martha stopped her hand that was about to knock and stared at the half-open door. From inside came the sounds of cheerful conversation. Bill's voice, and the voice of an unknown woman. Carol's voice was there too. Her laughter sounded too energetic to be that of a sick person. It's Daddy. Amy excitedly tried to move forward, but Martha instinctively grabbed her daughter's shoulder. Wait a moment, Martha whispered. Her intuition was warning her. Something was wrong. Something was off. She felt her pulse quicken. Amy looked up at her mother with a confused expression. What's wrong? Martha answered while choosing her words carefully. Let's first see what's happening inside. Amy obeyed her mother and peeked through the crack in the door. A few seconds later, her expression changed. Bewilderment, confusion, and some indescribable emotion appeared on her young face. Amy slowly turned back and gently tugged at Martha's sleeve. Mom, take a peek. Her voice was trembling. Martha bent down and peeked through the crack in the door. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. The living room was filled with sunlight. Bill was sitting on the sofa, with an unfamiliar young woman nestled beside him. The woman was about 30, with long blonde hair and refined features. She rested her head on Bill's shoulder, and his arm was around her waist. At their feet, a boy about 5 years old was playing with blocks spread out on the floor. Then, mother-in-law Carol appeared from the kitchen. She was carrying a silver tray with glasses of lemonade. Her walking posture was not that of a sick person but of someone extremely healthy. Bill, Jessica, here's some lemonade, Carol said. Noah, I brought cookies for you too. Yay! Thank you, Grandma. The little boy, called Noah, jumped up with joy. Martha's heart pounded fiercely. Grandma. This child called Carol Grandma. So, Jessica must be this woman's name, and Noah was. Daddy, play with me more. Noah patted Bill's knee. You promised. Bill smiled gently. Martha knew that expression well. That smile that had once been directed at her and Amy. "Sure, son," Bill answered while gently stroking Noah's hair. "But first, let's help Mom and Grandma a bit more." "Son." That word pierced Martha's ears sharply. Bill had called this child his son. Her knees trembled. Bill stood up and kissed Jessica. It was a relaxed, everyday gesture. A natural intimacy indicating a long relationship between them. "Mom." Amy's voice was trembling. She was trying to say something. Martha instinctively covered her daughter's mouth. "Shoo," she whispered with trembling lips. If her daughter called out to her father, everything would be over. She still needed time to understand and think about this situation. Tears welled up in Amy's eyes. Confusion and betrayal showed on her young face. Martha gently embraced her daughter and led her to a spot a little distance from the house. "Was that Daddy?" Amy asked in a voice that was about to cry. "Who are those people? Why did Daddy call that boy son?" Martha's mind was in turmoil, but she had to maintain her composure for her daughter's sake. "I don't know, Amy. But I'm going to find out." She took out her smartphone from her bag and activated the camera function. Various thoughts were swirling in her mind, but one thing was clear. She needed evidence. Martha took her daughter's hand and said, "Stay quiet for a moment. I'm going to look again." She quietly returned to the door and pointed her smartphone through the gap. She started recording video. Her hand was shaking, but she managed to capture the scene. Inside, the intimate family scene continued. Bill playing with Noah and blocks, Jessica watching with a smile, and Carol sitting with a satisfied expression. They were painting a picture of a perfect family. A picture of a family without Martha and Amy. "Bill, I'm so happy you have your real family now," Carol's voice was clearly recorded. "You should have left that woman earlier. How many years have I been telling you? She's not right for you. Jessica is the woman who deserves you." Martha's chest ached. Had Bill's mother never accepted her? Although she seemed kind on the surface, had she been advising her son to leave her all along? "I know, Mom," Bill's voice continued. "But it's not easy. I'm consulting with a lawyer about how to divorce Martha. But please don't tell her anything yet. Not until everything is settled." Jessica asked worriedly, "What if she finds out and learns about this?" Bill answered confidently, "Don't worry. Martha doesn't suspect anything. She's a simple and trusting woman. If I just mention Mother's illness, she'll believe anything." Anger welled up in Martha's heart. Simple. Trusting. Was he treating her like a fool? The truth about how her husband viewed her was crushing. "So, when are you going to talk about Amy?" Jessica asked. "She's your daughter, right?" Bill shrugged. "Martha will get custody. I have a new family now. Noah is enough for me." Those words delivered the final blow to Martha's heart. Was he going to abandon his own flesh and blood daughter so easily? Martha stopped the video recording with trembling hands. Tears had welled up in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness, they were tears of anger and determination. Enough evidence had been gathered. There was no need to see more. She returned to Amy. Her daughter was quietly crying in the shadow of the bushes. Martha embraced her tightly. "Let's go," Martha said quietly. "Aren't we going to see Daddy?" Amy asked in confusion. "Not right now. But it's going to be okay. Mom is here for you." The two quietly returned to the car without being noticed by anyone. Martha's mind was beginning to regain its clarity. Once in the car, Amy broke down crying in the back seat. Martha turned around and took her daughter's small hand. Amy, listen. We are strong. No matter what happens, I will protect you. It's hard right now, but we will definitely overcome this. But, Daddy. Daddy. Amy was at a loss for words. Daddy made the wrong choice. But that's not your fault. Absolutely not your fault. Martha started the car engine. Her heart was filled with the pain of betrayal, but at the same time, a clear path of what to do next was beginning to emerge. She took out her smartphone and called Karen. Karen's worried voice came from the other end of the phone. From inside the car parked at a motel, Martha calmly explained the situation while gazing at the scenery outside. Her voice was surprisingly steady. The trembling had stopped, and her thoughts were clear. It was a strange calmness that comes after shock. I can't believe it. Karen gasped. That heartless man. So, what are you going to do now? I don't know, Martha answered honestly. But I'll choose the best path for Amy and for myself. Come back right away, Karen said. Stay at my place. Don't think about this alone. Thank you. But tonight I'll stay at this motel. There's something I need to do before I return tomorrow. After ending the call, Martha looked at Amy. Her daughter had fallen asleep, exhausted from crying. Martha quietly got out of the car, checked in at the motel front desk, and then carried the sleeping Amy to the room. Her daughter's body, which once felt large, now seemed small and fragile. Entering the room and laying Amy on the bed, Martha finally confronted her own emotions. She went into the bathroom and stared at her face in the mirror. Her eyes were red and swollen from tears, but there was a light of determination in them. You are strong, she told herself. You can overcome this. Taking out her smartphone, she scrolled through her contact list. There was a name, Elizabeth Cohen. A lawyer she had met 2 years ago through a colleague's divorce case at the hospital. Martha took a deep breath and made the call. Cohen Law Office, a calm female voice responded. I'd like to speak with Elizabeth Cohen. This is Martha Carter. I need to see you urgently tomorrow. The next morning, on their way back to Houston, Martha and Amy stopped by the Cohen Law Office located downtown. Elizabeth was waiting for them, having opened the office early as promised. She was a composed woman in her mid-50s with an atmosphere that mixed strictness and kindness. This is the video I took yesterday, Martha handed over her smartphone. I also have photos. Elizabeth quietly reviewed the records and listened to Martha's story. Amy was in the small adjacent waiting room, coloring in a book prepared by Elizabeth's assistant. This is sufficient evidence, Elizabeth finally said. Martha, let me explain what you should do now. That afternoon, Martha left Amy with her mother, Judith. At a small one-story house in the Houston suburbs, Judith greeted Martha with surprise. What's wrong? Did something happen? A look of concern appeared on Judith's face. I'll explain later, Mom, Martha gently stroked Amy's back. Amy, stay with Grandma for a little while. Mom will be back soon. Aren't we going to Daddy's? Amy asked in a small voice. Not right now. But it's going to be okay, everything will work out, she kissed her daughter. As Martha left the house, Elizabeth was waiting. Did you go to the bank? Yes. As you advised, I transferred half of the joint account to a separate account, Martha answered. And I brought all the important documents. Good. Now, let's call Bill and... Martha took out her smartphone with trembling hands and dialed her husband's number. Bill answered on the third ring. Martha. I'm busy right now, later. I have an important work meeting, Martha said calmly. Lying was difficult for her, but it was necessary now. I'll be on a business trip for 3 days. Amy is at Mom's place. Oh, I see, Bill sounded relieved. I'll call you later then. Sure, talk to you later, Martha hung up. Perfect, Elizabeth nodded. This buys us time. Tomorrow, let's prepare the documents. 2 days later, everything was ready. Martha, along with Elizabeth, headed to Carol's house in the Austin suburbs. The two parked a rental car in front of Carol's house, and Martha took a deep breath. Are you ready? Elizabeth asked. Yes, Martha answered in a strong voice. It's time to end this. The two walked up to the house door, and Elizabeth knocked. A few seconds later, Bill opened it. Surprise spread across his face. Martha? Why are you here? He looked around anxiously. I told you not to come here. Hello, Bill, Martha's voice was as cold as ice. We need to talk. Now is not a good time. Mother is sick, Martha said sarcastically. Or is it because Jessica and Noah are here? The blood drained from Bill's face. He was at a loss for words, his mouth opening and closing. Who? He tried to pretend he didn't know. Enough acting, Martha said. I know everything, Bill. Your lies, your betrayal. At this moment, Carol appeared at the entrance. What's all this noise? She started to say but froze when she saw Martha. What are you doing here? Mother-in-law, I'm glad to see you're looking well, Martha said calmly. No longer bedridden, I see. Bill, get this woman out of here. Carol raised her voice. I don't think that's possible, Elizabeth stepped forward. I'm Elizabeth Cohen, attorney at law, representing Martha Carter. Amidst the confusion, Jessica appeared in the hallway. She was flustered at the sight of Martha and instinctively hid Noah behind her. Everyone, I have something to say, Martha said as she entered the house. First, Bill. These are divorce petition papers. And this is an application for sole custody of Amy. Martha, if we talk, you'll understand. Bill hastily said. Understand what? Martha looked him straight in the eye. That you betrayed me, had a relationship with this woman, and even had a child with her. That you lied about your mother's illness and led a double life. We have evidence, Elizabeth said calmly. Everything is recorded. Martha turned back to Bill. Amy and I don't need someone like you in our lives. Goodbye. Her voice was trembling, but it was full of strength and determination. 3 months had passed. Mom, look. Isn't my new room lovely? Amy was happily running around her room in the new apartment. The walls were painted a pale pink, and from the window, a small park was visible. It really is lovely, Martha answered with a smile. The divorce proceedings had progressed smoothly, with Martha securing half of the joint property with Bill and successfully obtaining custody of Amy. She had also been promoted at the hospital, gradually alleviating her financial concerns. While organizing the moving boxes, Martha's mother Judith appeared from the kitchen. I've made coffee, she told her daughter. Let's take a little break. Judith had been devotedly supporting Martha after the divorce. Martha's sister Laura also visited every weekend, taking Amy to movies and accompanying Martha to help her change her mood. Karen will be here soon, Martha said as she accepted the coffee. She's bringing dinner to celebrate the move. Karen and her family were also warmly watching over Martha and Amy's new life. Though not related by blood, they supported the two like a true family. A year later, Martha's apartment was bustling with Amy's 8th birthday party. Judith, Laura, Karen and her family, and Amy's school friends had gathered, and the room was filled with laughter, music, and a warm atmosphere. Happy birthday, Amy, everyone said in unison, and Amy took a deep breath and blew out all the candles on the cake at once. Amidst the applause, Martha proudly watched her daughter's growth. Outside the window, a car stopped in the apartment parking lot. Bill, who emerged from it, was looking up at the building from a distance. He appeared more tired than a year ago. Bill's affair family had collapsed. Jessica had discovered he was cheating with another woman and had left with Noah. Mother-in-law Carol was alone and had truly fallen ill and been hospitalized. Medical expenses and the burden of his double life had financially cornered Bill. Having made several attempts to contact Martha for reconciliation, only to be firmly rejected, today he had come just to see Amy from afar, driven by a desire to see his daughter. From the apartment window, the smiling figures of Amy and Martha were visible. Amy had adapted to her new environment and had regained her bright smile, surrounded by friends at school. Martha, having been promoted, watched over her daughter with a confident expression. Bill stood still, realizing the magnitude of what he had lost. Amy, having finished opening her presents, ran to Martha. "Mom, thank you. This is the best birthday ever." Martha embraced her daughter and looked around. Her mother, sister, friends, the circle of people who supported them. "Amy, remember this," Martha said gently. "Family isn't just about blood ties. Love and sincerity create a true family." Outside the window, Bill's car slowly drove away. Chicago winter mornings are mercilessly cold. Margaret Wilson sighed deeply as she punched her time card at the end of her shift. The final hours of the night shift had been particularly busy, with 3 CPR incidents and assisting in 1 emergency surgery. The hospital ward's nursing station was filled with early morning hustle and bustle. "Good work, Margaret. We're so thankful you were here today," said Susan Chambers, the night shift head nurse, patting her shoulder lightly. Margaret smiled back. Working at Chicago General Hospital for 10 years, she had become a trusted presence in the emergency department of this large medical center. "Thanks, Susan. We managed to get through it somehow." In the locker room, Margaret changed out of her nurse's uniform into a soft sweater and jeans, then checked her cell phone. There was a message from her husband, James. "Heading to work early this morning. Could you take Ryan to school? Abby was up late last night, so it might be better not to wake her. Love you." Margaret responded to the message with a slight sense of unease. "Okay. Take care. Love you too." Recently, James, who worked as a salesman in real estate, had been leaving home earlier and returning later than before. According to him, the market was booming and he had new clients. Margaret trusted her husband, but sometimes she got the impression he was hiding something. She got into her car and headed home. Snow began to fall, with tiny crystals landing on the windshield. Their house in Chicago's suburbs was a 2-story home they had purchased right after getting married 10 years ago. As Margaret opened the door, she heard her son's voice from the quiet house. "Mom, welcome home." 12-year-old Ryan was eating breakfast at the kitchen table. In front of him was a bowl of cereal with milk, and he had spread out his school homework. Margaret kissed him lightly on the head. "Good morning, Ryan. Finished your homework?" "Almost. But this math part is a little difficult." Margaret sat next to her son, offering to help with his homework. Ryan was a bright, intelligent boy who excelled in science and history but struggled a bit with math. "Where's Dad?" Ryan asked. "He said he left early for work. Seems he has a new client." Ryan was about to say something but swallowed his words. Margaret noticed but didn't press him. Her son seemed more contemplative lately. She thought it might be the beginning of adolescence. "Is Aunt Abby still sleeping?" "Looks like it. Dad's message said she was up late last night, so it's better to let her rest. Margaret's sister Abby had divorced 4 months ago and was temporarily staying with them. Her marriage had lasted just 3 years. She had made the decision after discovering her husband's infidelity. Margaret wanted to give her sister time and space to start a new life. Ready for school. It's time for the bus, Margaret said, looking at the clock. Ryan hurriedly stuffed his homework into his bag and put on his jacket. Margaret handed him a sandwich for lunch. Have a good day. Come straight home after school. Okay, Mom. I might be a little late today because I'm studying math with my friend Mike.
Do you know some people earn over $10,000 a month just by posting Reddit stories on YouTube? No face, no voice, just a laptop. I do it too, link below if you're curious.
Margaret hugged her son and watched him leave the house. After finishing some chores, she gently knocked on Abby's door upstairs. When there was no answer, Margaret opened the door slightly and peeked in. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, and Abby was nowhere to be seen. Margaret frowned. It was unusual for her sister to go out so early in the morning. She started to contact her by phone but stopped herself from sending a message. Abby was an adult. She had the right to her own time. Margaret dragged her tired body to bed. Sleep after the night shift was precious. But before falling asleep, she couldn't help thinking about her family. Something felt off lately. The subtly changed atmosphere in the family. James's return times. Abby's strange behavior. Ryan's silence. Still, Margaret reassured herself. The family was fine. Everyone was just dealing with life changes in their own way. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow would be a new day. Everything would return to normal. 3 weeks later, Margaret was having lunch in the hospital cafeteria. Her colleague Diana sat across from her, placing a coffee down and whispering. Margaret, are you all right? You look tired lately. Margaret looked up and forced a smile. Yes, I'm fine. Just busy. In reality, she was far from fine. The subtle changes in the family atmosphere were troubling her. Recently, her husband James carried his smartphone everywhere and always seemed apprehensive. He hastily checked the screen whenever a message arrived and quickly put it away when Margaret approached. His explanation was that he was under pressure with ongoing deals with important clients, but Margaret felt there was some other reason. Really? How are things at home? Is Abby still living with you? Diana's question seemed to carry some implication. Yes, she still is. She seems to be trying to get her life back on track lately. Margaret thought about her sister. Abby had clearly changed recently. Previously, she had been unable to recover from the pain of divorce and often stayed in her room, but now she spent time on makeup every morning, bought new clothes, and went out more frequently. When Margaret asked, "Has something good happened?" Abby deflected the conversation saying, "I'm just trying to think positively about life." Margaret looked into Diana's eyes. "Do you know something?" Diana shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "No, not really. I'm just concerned." Margaret sensed that there was truth hidden in her friend's words, but she didn't pursue it further. She remembered Ryan. Her son had changed too. After returning from school, he used to eat snacks in the kitchen while telling her about his day, but now he often silently retreated to his room. The previous evening, Margaret had knocked on Ryan's door. "Ryan, dinner time." "I'm not hungry," came her son's voice from inside. Margaret opened the door and entered Ryan's room. He was sitting on the bed, hugging his knees. "What's wrong? Is there a problem?" Ryan didn't look up and shrugged. "Nothing. Did something happen at school? Are you being bullied?" "No. It's just. He stumbled over his words. I don't understand grown-up business. Margaret frowned at those words. What do you mean? Ryan fell silent and said in a small voice, nothing. Margaret was brought back to reality by Diana's voice. The doctors have noticed changes in you too. You're usually so careful, but yesterday you almost made a mistake in a patient's records. Margaret blushed. Indeed, yesterday she had lacked concentration. She had almost written medication for one patient in another patient's record. Fortunately, Dr. Carter, the chief physician, noticed her mistake and corrected it. I'm sorry. I'll be more careful. Diana took her friend's hand. Margaret, if something's wrong, why not talk about it? Margaret took a deep breath, hesitating whether to confide her worries. But she didn't know what to say. She herself didn't yet understand the situation. I'm really fine. Just a bit tired. That night, Margaret was preparing for her night shift. James had said he would be late from work, so she asked Abby to handle Ryan's dinner. Of course, sis. Don't worry, Abby answered cheerfully. Margaret found her sister's behavior strange, so different from before. She who had once seemed depressed now appeared unusually bright. Meanwhile, her son and husband seemed to be dragging some dark shadow. Margaret couldn't understand what was happening in her family. Arriving at the hospital, her colleague Susan greeted her with a worried face. Margaret, do you have a moment? They moved to a corner of the nursing station. Susan looked around and began speaking in a low voice. About your husband. Margaret's heart raced. James? What happened? Last Saturday, when I was at the mall, I saw him. The woman he was with. Abby? Margaret's voice trembled. Susan looked surprised. You knew? No, just. Margaret was at a loss for words. She had sensed something before but didn't want to acknowledge it. Her husband and sister. It was too painful a betrayal. They seemed very intimate. Susan chose her words carefully. Holding hands and laughing. If you didn't know, maybe I shouldn't have said anything. Margaret leaned against the wall. All the pieces were starting to connect in her mind. James's late returns home. Abby's sudden change. And her son Ryan's words, I don't understand grown-up business. It's okay, Susan. Thank you for telling me. During that night's shift, Margaret's mind was in turmoil. She tried to focus on patient care, but her family situation occupied her thoughts. How should she handle this? Should she confront them directly? Or gather evidence? If her husband and sister were truly betraying her, her world would collapse. At 2 a.m., an emergency call rang out. Code Blue, Emergency Treatment Room. Code Blue, Emergency Treatment Room. Margaret rushed there. The emergency room was bustling with activity. Multiple medical staff were moving busily, and new patients seemed to be arriving. 3 traffic accident victims, seriously injured, shouted a young resident. A car apparently hit a tree on the highway. Margaret tried to focus on her role. However, at that moment, her cell phone rang. Normally she would ignore it, but feeling uneasy about a call so late at night, she checked her phone. Mrs. Wilson, a voice that sounded like a police officer. Your husband, sister, and son have been in an accident. They're being transported to Chicago General Hospital now. Margaret's world stopped. I'm there now. She hung up and walked to the emergency room on trembling legs. Margaret's feet moved as if they weren't her own. She pushed open the doors to the emergency room. It was overflowing with medical staff, tense voices, and machine warning sounds intermingling. Where? Where are they? Margaret cried. Susan rushed over to her and grabbed her arm. Margaret! Where is my family? Susan's expression darkened. Resolutely, she led Margaret to the back of the treatment room. There, 3 stretchers were lined up. Bodies covered with white sheets, connected to IVs and monitoring devices. Margaret approached step by step, feeling intense trembling. On the first bed lay her husband James. His face had lacerations, and his right arm was bent at an unnatural angle. On the next bed was her sister Abby. Her beautiful face was swollen, with a large wound on her forehead. And on the last bed lay her beloved son Ryan. His small body looked defenseless, with a bandage wrapped around his head. All 3 were unconscious. James. Abby. Ryan. Margaret cried, trying to rush to them. But Dr. Carter, the chief physician, stood in her way and quietly stopped her. Margaret, calm down. Your family. It's better not to see them now. Margaret asked in a trembling voice, why? How are they? Dr. Carter said with his head down, we'll explain everything when the police arrive. Blood rushed to Margaret's head. Police? Why police? Isn't it just an accident? At that moment, the treatment room doors opened, and 2 uniformed police officers entered. One was an older man, the other a young woman. Mrs. Wilson. I'm Detective Johnson. This is my partner, Detective Lee, the older officer introduced himself. May we talk to you for a moment? Margaret nodded slowly, still gazing at her family lying on the beds. Susan wrapped an arm around her shoulders and guided her to a quiet interview room. Dr. Carter and the 2 detectives followed. In the interview room, Detective Johnson began speaking quietly. Mrs. Wilson, I'm very sorry to say this, but there are suspicious aspects to tonight's accident. According to witness statements, there was a heated argument in the car just before the accident. The car began to swerve and eventually crashed into a tree by the roadside. Margaret tried to understand the words. An argument? Between whom? We don't know exactly yet. However. Detective Johnson paused as if choosing his words. Is there something you're hiding? Margaret's heart pounded. Your husband's smartphone was found at the accident scene. The screen displayed a message. Detective Lee took out the smartphone from an evidence bag and showed it to Margaret. There was no passcode on James's phone. The message app was open with a message to Abby. Tonight, let's tell Margaret everything. We can't keep hiding it. Now that Ryan knows, it will only destroy his heart if we continue like this. Margaret was speechless. Blood rushed to her head, and her ears rang. All the pieces connected. Her husband's late returns. Her sister's changes. Her son's behavior. Before her eyes, her family's secret was revealed. James and my sister. She choked on the words. Detective Johnson quietly nodded. Our investigation shows that your husband and sister were having an intimate relationship. And it seems your son witnessed it. We believe they were trying to have a discussion tonight. Margaret's world crumbled. Strength left her body, and she collapsed into a chair. The betrayal of her husband and sister. And the weight of the secret her innocent son had been carrying. Their condition, she finally managed to say. Dr. Carter stepped forward. They're all stable. However, there was impact to their brains, and they're currently in comas. Your son in particular had a strong impact to his head, so the next 24 hours are critical. Margaret closed her eyes. Tears streamed down her cheeks. My son, he knew. To think he was carrying such a burden alone. Detective Lee quietly said, This was found in your son's backpack. She took out a folded piece of paper. Margaret took it and opened it. It was a page from a diary written in Ryan's childish handwriting. Today I saw Dad and Aunt Abby kissing in the kitchen. I don't know how to tell Mom. Dad asked me, this is grown-up business, please don't tell Mom. But I hate lying. I hate to see Mom sad. What should I do? Margaret clutched the paper to her chest and sobbed loudly. Her heart was torn. Worry for her loved ones and anger at their betrayal. Most painful of all was her son's suffering. A boy of just 12, forced to carry adult secrets, she couldn't bear it. Let me see them, Margaret pleaded with tear-blurred eyes. Dr. Carter hesitated. Margaret, will you be able to see their condition calmly? I'm a nurse. And, they're my family. Even if they betrayed me. Dr. Carter nodded quietly and took Margaret back to the treatment room. She first went to her son's bed. She took Ryan's small hand and gently squeezed it. Mommy's here, Ryan. Please wake up. Please, she whispered. You were so brave. But you don't have to carry such a burden anymore. Next, she went to her sister's bed. The sister she had been close to since childhood. The sister who betrayed her. Margaret's heart was filled with conflicting emotions. Why, Abby? We were sisters, she said quietly. Finally, she stood at her husband James's bed. 10 years of marriage. Memories with him. And now, the revealed betrayal. What were our vows? She asked. But there was no answer. Margaret turned to Dr. Carter. Please let me know when they wake up. Especially Ryan. I should be the first face he sees. A week passed since the accident. Margaret was in Ryan's hospital room, gazing at the morning sun streaming through the window. Her son was still in a coma, but doctors said there were signs of recovery. Brain wave activity had increased, and occasionally his fingers moved. It was a glimmer of hope. Margaret had taken leave from work. Her hospital colleagues were concerned about her and took turns visiting, bringing toys, books, and flowers for Ryan. Susan was particularly attentive, making sure Margaret ate and took breaks. Get some rest, Susan said. I'll be here. Margaret smiled with a tired face. Thank you. But I'm fine. I think I should be the first face he sees when he wakes up. Meanwhile, James and Abby had regained consciousness 3 days earlier. They had been moved to separate rooms, and Margaret hadn't tried to see them. However, today she decided. For Ryan's sake, she felt she needed to know the truth. Ryan, Mommy's going out for a bit. I'll be right back. She kissed her son's forehead and left the room. Walking down the hallway, Margaret's heart was in turmoil. Anger, sadness, and above all, the deep pain of betrayal. However, she tried to maintain her composure as a medical professional. Not to be swept away by emotions, but to know the facts. In front of James's hospital room door, she took a deep breath. After knocking, she entered to find her husband lying in a bed by the window. His face still bore injuries, and his right arm was in a cast. Seeing Margaret enter, his eyes widened. Margaret. His voice was weak. In the adjacent bed sat Abby. The swelling on her face had subsided considerably, but a large bruise remained under her eyes. Seeing Margaret, she lowered her gaze. Why? Margaret asked in a cold voice as soon as she entered the room. James and Abby exchanged glances and shamefully lowered their eyes. Margaret, let me explain. James began. At first it was just comfort. Abby was hurt from the divorce. Comfort. Margaret's voice trembled. Is having an affair with my sister Comfort? Abby said through tears, "Sis, I'm so sorry. This wasn't the intention. But when I realized, and my son found out," Margaret was shaking with anger. "What did he see? How much do you think he was hurt?" The truth was revealed. A month ago, Ryan had come home early on an early dismissal day from school. As he quietly entered the house, he heard giggling from the kitchen. When he peeked in, he saw his father and aunt embracing and kissing. Ryan froze. His father noticed him and hurriedly tried to explain. "Son, it's grown-up business. Please don't tell Mom." Since then, Ryan had been suffering from confusion and guilt. He loved his mother but feared that telling the truth would destroy the family. He withdrew, lost his appetite, and couldn't concentrate at school. On the day of the accident, Ryan couldn't bear it anymore and declared to his father and aunt that he would tell Mom everything. A panicked James tried to persuade Ryan in the car, and Abby accompanied them. The heated argument in the car caused the accident. "Because of your selfishness, my son became the victim," Margaret choked on the words. "All he wanted was for me to know the truth." James wept. "I won't ask for forgiveness. But Ryan, I never meant to hurt him." "But he was hurt," Margaret said coldly. "Because of you too." Abby looked up. "Sis, how is Ryan?" "Still in a coma. But the doctors say there are signs of recovery." A tense silence filled the room. "Anything from the police?" James fearfully asked. "It's being handled as an accident. Your driving mistake was the cause. Of course, the message on your cell phone is on record." James lowered his face. "I've consulted a lawyer. I intend to start divorce proceedings. I'll pay sufficient child support and compensation to you and Ryan." "It's not about money," Margaret said quietly. "You betrayed 10 years of marriage and my trust." "Sis," Abby said in a trembling voice. "We don't intend to continue the relationship. It was a mistake. But we never meant to hurt you." Margaret stared at Abby. The sister she had grown up with since childhood. The sister who had cried with joy at her wedding. And now, the sister who had taken her happiness. "You made your choice. And I'll make mine. A new life for Ryan and me." She said nothing more and left the room. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Suppressing her anger and sadness, she returned to Ryan's hospital room. As she entered, doctors were gathered around her son's bed. Margaret's heart nearly stopped. "What happened?" she cried. Dr. Carter turned around, and surprisingly, he was smiling. "He's awake, Margaret." Margaret rushed over. Ryan's eyes were open. He looked weak and confused, but definitely conscious. "Ryan." Margaret took her son's hand. "It's Mom, do you understand?" Ryan nodded slowly. "Mom." His voice was hoarse. The doctors continued their examinations and eventually left the room. Dr. Carter stayed back last and explained to Margaret. "It's miraculous. There's no significant damage to his brain, and he has a good chance of full recovery. Of course, rehabilitation will be necessary, but being young, his recovery should be quick." Margaret wept. This time they were tears of joy. "Thank you, Doctor." After Dr. Carter left the room, Margaret sat beside her son. Ryan looked at his mother and trembled his lips. "Mom, I'm sorry about not telling you about Dad and Aunt Abby." Margaret gently stroked her son's hair. "You did nothing wrong. Instead, I'm sorry you had to carry such a burden alone. But it's okay now. Mom is here." Dad? Aunt Abby. They're both recovering. But, Ryan, life will be a little different from now on. We're going to become a new family. Ryan closed his eyes understandingly. Though still weak, he firmly gripped his mother's hand. I want to be with Mom, he said in a small voice. Margaret gently embraced her son. We'll still be a family, Ryan. But in a new form. Let's be strong together. One Sunday morning a year later, Margaret was making pancakes in the kitchen. From the living room came Ryan's laughter. He had fully recovered and was adapting well to life at his new school. Margaret felt the sunlight streaming through the window and reflected on the past year. The first few months had been difficult. Divorce proceedings, moving, and her son's rehabilitation and counseling. But they were moving forward little by little. Margaret, who had returned to the hospital, now worked shorter hours. She treasured her time with Ryan. Mom, are Ben and Joshua coming to the park picnic today? Ryan came into the kitchen. Yes, they are, Margaret smiled. Ben Harrison was a pediatrician she had met at the PTA of Ryan's new school, and he had a 9-year-old son, Joshua. She and Ben, also raising a child alone, had gradually deepened their friendship. They're nice, Ryan said frankly. I got a letter from Dad. James had moved to the West Coast. He was receiving counseling for alcohol dependency and facing his actions. He wrote to Ryan once a month and occasionally called. It would take a long time to repair the father-son relationship, but at least he was trying. Dad says he started volunteer work helping children, Ryan said. Margaret nodded. That's good. As she was preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, she found Abby standing there with a bouquet of flowers. May I come in? She asked nervously. Abby had completed a rehabilitation program and started working as a counselor at a women's support center. She had sent Margaret several apologetic letters. 3 months ago, Margaret began writing short replies, and last week they spoke on the phone for the first time. Ryan, someone's here to see you, Margaret called her son. Ryan hesitated at first but soon rushed to Abby and lightly hugged her. How have you been? How's school? Abby asked. Margaret returned to the kitchen and made coffee. Repairing the sisters' relationship wasn't easy, but at least they were trying. She was surprised at herself. What once seemed unforgivable now seemed possible. It wasn't weakness, but strength. At night, after Ryan was asleep, Margaret opened her diary. Today, Abby came to the house. Something I couldn't have imagined a year ago. The wounds haven't completely healed, but we're moving forward. Life sometimes takes unexpected directions. But what matters, I think, is whether you have the courage to stand up after the storm. She looked out the window. A new moon was floating in the sky. The Chicago night was quiet, somehow peaceful. Tomorrow is a new day. And she and Ryan would overcome whatever days might come, together. Every ending is also a new beginning. Margaret etched this in her heart as she turned off the lights.